Hello and welcome. My name's Dr. Phil Winder and I'm the CEO of Winder.AI. In these talks, I like to discuss the work that we've been doing in the past, and for this presentation, I'd like to talk a bit more about the work we do in MLOps, and specifically how we help companies augment and develop their MLOps platform teams, and also help develop their platforms themselves. So this presentation is going to be about when you actually need an MLOps platform team in the first place, because I do get asked that question quite a lot. And I think before I jump in, I think I should probably just make some clarifications on the terminology that I'm using here. I say MLOps platform team. Other people might also call it an ML platform team. That's fine. You know, basically, it's a team that helps the ML engineers and the data scientists to do their job better by providing them with software and services. So I'll dig into the roles and responsibilities a little bit later, but I just wanted to make that clear from the get-go. Okay, let's jump into the presentation now. So I hope that this presentation will give you a bit more information on when you do need an MLOps platform team. If you'd like to talk to me about your MLOps platform team, then feel free to reach out. There's contact details at the end, or you can just go to Winder.AI. The presentation is going to be probably about 20-25 minutes, so not too long, this one. And I will have time for questions at the end. So if you have any questions right now, then feel free to pop them in the message window of the platform that you're watching this in. Or yeah, you can just reach out offline if you like. So before I dig into, well, actually, I'm going to delay the answer a little bit in this presentation. Ultimately, I'm going to try and answer the question when you need an MLOps platform team. But first, I want to cover some of the roles and responsibilities. And I really should have found a meme for this slide. I like to call this slide ML flops rather than MLOps. We have worked at a number of companies that aim to provide MLOps to the rest of the users within the business. And quite often we see comments that raise our eyebrows. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of an impression about the day-to-day use of MLOps in the company. We've worked on quite a few projects where people are under the impression that if we build something, then people will come. And actually, that's not a great place to be, because being an MLOps platform engineer is a very consultative role, actually, because you have users, you have customers. Your customers may reside within the same business, and therefore you're not directly reaching the business's customer, but you still have users and you still have customers, and you need to operate like that. You need to solve problems that they have and not invent problems that they might have. At best, it's just a waste of time, but at worst, you end up trying to force users down a path or a pattern that they don't necessarily want. Another common phrase that we hear is the CEO or CTO says we need to implement thing. Same thing again. The issue here is that the CTO or the CEO isn't necessarily your direct customer. They're not the people that are going to be using your systems, and therefore you probably should be speaking to the people that are going to be using your systems, rather than rely on the word from above. We sometimes come into situations where the requirements for the work that we're asked to do aren't clearly defined. And this isn't such a bad problem, to be honest, because that's quite easily fixed. Again, we can just go and speak to the people that are going to be using these systems and develop the requirements ourselves. But you do need to identify what that pain is. You do need to identify the thing that you're trying to solve for that person. And yeah, so there are all sort of problems and comments that we see relating to the development of applications on an ML platform. When it comes to actually using the ML platform or the MLOps tooling that you implement, one other issue that we find is that if you have users actively asking you, can you help us do this, that, or the other? You know, how do you do this, that, or the other? I mean, that's okay to a degree, because maybe your documentation isn't up to scratch, or maybe maybe the UX just isn't quite there, and you can actually you can work on that. But if you get to the point where you are repeatedly having people saying, you know, we need help to actually use your platform, then you're doing something that really doesn't help the user. So you kind of, you know, you need to improve on that. But it may just be that that you need a certain level of expertise in order to use your platform in the first place. So you may consider sort of spinning off some sort of consulting like arm to your MLOps platform team. And finally, in many situations, the MLOps team are usually the ones that are actually recommending new tools and new ways of working to their ML engineers. Well, I think that sort of that thought leadership, it can work in certain cases, especially if you have engineers that are experienced. They have experience from other companies that they can bring to the table, and they can make suggestions and improvements and things. So that's always good. But yeah, again, I want to keep coming home, keep driving home the fact that your customer is the person using that platform. So you really need to be dealing with their needs and their pains, and develop a platform around them. Okay, so that's MLFlops. Now let's move on to some comments, and yeah, comments is the wrong word. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say you might hear these sentences in your business, and if you do hear them, then it might point to the fact that you need an MLOps platform or an MLOps platform team. Some common quotes include, I want to deploy my XYZ. So when you have sort of ML teams that are taking the next step, they're taking this next step to become more of a DevOps-like team, where they actually want to deploy and operate the models themselves, you should definitely encourage that. It's a really good practice to get into. But quite often they need help to deploy and expose their thing, because the company is saying that, you know, there's rules and regulations and requirements that you need to achieve. There's a standard you need to achieve before you can deploy your thing. So helping them do that with an MLOps platform is a really great way to do that. If you find people are saying that they're spending a lot of time doing certain tasks, or equally, if maybe they're struggling to get things right, and they're sort of saying, you know, we're repeatedly having the same problems over and over again, that could be a really good avenue to explore, to try and figure out whether there are potential automations that you could implement. And it could be simple. It may not be MLE. It may be very sort of, you know, DevOpsy. But still, if you're developing automations and making it easier for people to get over those hurdles and develop new ways to make their job easier, then that is actually one of the key aims of an MLOps platform team. Sometimes you come across tasks that are just really dull, and if they say that I really don't like doing this part of the job, I want to be doing this part of the job more, then again, you can work as an MLOps platform team to try and automate away some of the boring parts, to allow people to work on the more interesting parts. It's quite common to find that the interesting aspects of the job are the parts of the job that actually lead to innovation and lead to value for the end customer. So it's quite important to automate away those really boring parts. And finally, if you hear people saying that, you know, we've done multiple projects that are all looking very similar, can we just copy paste that project over here as to bootstrap our new development? When you have quotes like that, then it's clear that the business is working in the same domain with the same data potentially, and maybe you can streamline that process and make it easier for people to get started. Okay, so that's what that's how MLOps platform teams are born. I want to talk a bit more about the process now, because it really is important, and this relates to where you are as a company. So this kind of will feed into the final answer of when you need an MLOps platform team. I like to present the data science life cycle, which is down the left-hand side there. The goal, data, feature engineering, modeling, training, evaluation, deployment. You know, it's typically described as a as a loop, and it goes round and round. But there are actually other dimensions that can kind of spin off of that definition of doing data science. And one of the axes that I like to add is the phase of the project that you're working on, basically the maturity of the project that you're working on. And there's some very well-tested ways of developing projects that aim to de-risk project development. So typically most companies will go through a proof of concept phase where they're attempting to validate or prove viability, that the idea that they have, the theory or the thesis or the idea that they have, is actually achievable. There's usually a couple of key potential blockers that prevent that from that project from working. In data science and AI in general, it's usually the data. If you don't have the data, or if you don't have enough quality data, or if the data doesn't represent the problem, so on and so forth, then it may not be possible to actually build this solution at all. So you want to de-risk that as early as possible. So the first phase is a proof of concept. Then you have like a number of different phases in the middle. Maybe an MVP, minimum viable product, maybe an MDP, minimum deployable product. But eventually you'll try and aim for in production. And production means that it's serving real users with real workloads. As you go through those phases, you need to maintain and upgrade the maturity of the project that you're working on. So, I don't want to go through all of these fields, because then we'd have to dig into, what reproducibility actually means and things. But for example, let's take training, for example. When you're in POC mode, you're usually in a notebook and you're just training ad hoc. You're just running the fit function in your notebook, trying to prove that you can possibly build a model that sort of solves the problem. But as soon as you get past the POC phase, we need to automate that. We need to build some pipelines around it. We need to allow other people and other systems to be able to retrain our model. And so we make it more automatic when we move into an MDP phase. Finally, when we're getting into production, we don't just need to train models like on an automated basis. We actually need to be training models proactively, or maybe reactively, where if you're looking at the data that's being produced, maybe you have monitoring in place, and your monitoring will inform the training system that the data has drifted, therefore we need to retrain again on new data. So it's an example of the same task. All we're doing is just training a model, but it's not as simple as saying, we just need to train a model. There's one set of development and techniques and tools for a POC, another for an MDP, another for production. Similarly, different people are involved at different times throughout the life cycle of the project. During the POC phase, it's principally a data scientist that's working on a proof of concept. Sometimes you get a data engineer involved to help you access or work upon the data if required, but primarily it's a data scientist. When you move into an MDP phase, then an ML engineer, a person that is responsible to automate and pipeline and develop all of the code that supports the infrastructure for the model, the training pipelines of the model I've already mentioned, and other things that are sort of ancillary to the actual task. Are all included there. The data engineer becomes more involved as well, because they need to start automating the data pipelines, the pipelines that are feeding the raw data that is required for the model and performing all the transformations and so on. And then finally, when you're getting into production, then you may have application engineers involved if they are, building APIs or interacting with your model in any way. And also at the bottom there, we've got supporting roles. And this is where the MLOps platform fits in. Similar to the DevOps platform I'm going to talk about in just a second, an MLOps platform engineer will provide some of the tools to make it easier to do some of these things and move a POC into a production product. So lots of people involved in doing AI, lots of different maturities throughout the organization, and the phase of the project is really important. And so to bring it all back to the beginning again, what is MLOps? I tried to sort of reduce this as much as possible. I think MLOps is processes and tools that help reduce risk and productionize faster. So let's sort of split that up a little bit and talk about each of those individual components. So MLOps is processes and tools. So it's not a specific tool. It's not one system. It's not one cloud. It is a set of processes that fits around your particular way of working, and those processes are unique to your company and your product. You probably can't take another company's MLOps platform with its own processes and tools and just paste it into your domain and your company and expect it to work efficiently. So processes and tools are very unique. The tools attempt to help enact some of those processes. Sometimes the tools are used to deliver specific functionality that the data scientist needs to do their job, or the ML engineer needs to do their job, and so on and so forth. That helps reduce risk. This is the number one thing that I think that this is the primary value for doing MLOps and for having an MLOps platform team. Helping reduce the risk that a project or a model or a system or a process, reduce the risk of any of those failing. If you have a model or if you have, say you have thousands of models in production and they're all happening in 1,000 different ways with 1,000 different people working on them, it's highly likely that some of those people are going to there's going to be problems, there's going to be failures, there's going to be security breaches, so on and so forth. MLOps and MLOps processes and tools, they help define standards and unify the work of all of these disparate teams to help prove that their applications and their models are safe, are robust, are reliable. And that's really the primary value of MLOps. And productionize faster. So if you have all of these processes in place, if you can automate all of the boring parts, if you have really nice tools and a really nice user experience, then the engineers, the data scientists, the ML engineers and so forth, they're going to be able to work quicker and produce products faster. Okay, hopefully there's nothing contentious there. So one thing I touched upon then was that different businesses have different needs. And this is very similar to Conway's law. So this is discussed in the microservices literature. The idea behind Conway's law is that his law states that software will always evolve to match the organizational structure. So I'm kind of borrowing or stealing that idea and saying it's even worse when it comes to machine learning, because yes, you have different organizational structures, and therefore your solutions will sort of map around that organizational structure. But also you have different industries, okay? And different industries do things in different ways. And different industries have different applications. And so they work in very different ways. And finally, many companies have very different technical philosophies. So let me go through an example of all of those. So different organizational structures. Imagine the differences in an MLOps platform compare the difference between a company that has a very flat structure and is very decentralized versus a very hierarchical structure. You know, one is going to want an MLOps platform that has gates and sort of QA phases and lots of controls and things in place. Another is going to be a bit the flat sort of decentralized structure is going to empower people a lot more. There's going to be less controls, fewer gates, and give power to the engineers directly. Different business sectors and different industries. So imagine the energy industry, for example. They have a very different set of needs and requirements compared to the advertising industry or the manufacturing industry. Different applications have different needs. So even within a single industry, in the energy market, for example, if you're working in like renewables versus like traditional oil and gas or something, Very different applications, very different requirements. And finally, different technical philosophies. So here you might have a company that really focuses on and really encourages do it yourself and build it your own and open source and things like that. Another company might prefer much more managed service-based, let's buy it off the shelf approach. So, all of those things add up to to produce a very different set of tools and a very different set of processes. And it's basically makes it unique for every single company. In an ideal world, what we are looking for in an MLOps platform is unification across applications. So if you get into the situation where you have a number of applications that are doing very similar things, say, for example, they're all scraping the internet, they're all working on text data, they're all trying to classify this, that, or the other. When you get into that situation, it becomes really easy to provide a unified set of tools. Same idea goes for sector specialization or focus. If you're working on an individual in an individual industry within the bounds of a sector, then it makes it easier to be able to generate specialized tools. And finally, that idea of unification does need to be built into the business structure as well. If you become too decentralized, then what ends up happening is that everybody has different needs. And because everybody has different needs, there's no point trying to build one unified platform. You have to let them do it in their own way. So business structure is very important. So moving on to how do we do this then? Okay, so how do you actually spin up and start an MLOps platform and therefore an MLOps platform team? A couple of years ago, I spoke about the MLOps hierarchy of needs. I've sort of simplified the idea since then, but my main idea here is that MLOps is a very high-level concept. ML is a very high-level concept. You need a lot of fundamental technologies in place to allow you to do your work effectively. I've kind of provided a few here, like, the bottom two are absolute requirements. You need, in order to develop MLOps processes and provide MLOps tools, you need to be able to spin up infrastructure to host those things. Okay, if you can't do that, then you're going to struggle to create bespoke solutions. So that points you down one path immediately. If you aren't able to spin up and manage your own infrastructure, then you should be using a managed service. Similarly, DevOps and DevOps teams are becoming increasingly important for MLOps, because the MLOps team themselves are actually building products for the data scientists. They are building products, and therefore they need a similar product development mindset where they build, develop, and deploy all of their own products. So you can leverage and make use of all of the DevOps tooling that already exists in your company. Again, if you don't have a DevOps team, if you've got like maybe a traditional software engineering and ops teams that are totally separate and totally disparate, it's going to make it very hard to build an MLOps platform because you can't react quickly enough to user need. Then we have some more interesting ML-related dependencies. DataOps is increasingly being used to attempt to provide services to help people access and discover data without the need for a data engineer potentially, and SecOps as well, security-based operations where again teams are trying to provide tools that are secure by default. Think of things like a unified auth layer, for example, throughout your business. I would say that those two things are not necessarily required. Even DevOps to a certain degree is not necessarily required because you can probably work independently, but you definitely depend on being able to spin up and control your own software development practices, basically. All right, so let's move on to the meat now. When do we need an MLOps platform team? So here is a table of observations that we have made throughout our experience working on MLOps platform teams for a variety of companies. I've semi-anonymized some of the results here, and I've also, sort of fudged the numbers to just make them to make them to make them less specific. They're all approximations, effectively. We've got a range of companies here, mostly in the tech industry. So we're biased to working in the tech industry. That's where the majority of our experience lies. But we have worked, and we do work for companies of vastly different sizes. We've worked for some really big enterprises, we've worked with some startups, and we've worked with people in between. So that represents the first column, the second column there, sorry. The first column is the industry. The second column is the number of people that exist, that exist. That's the number of people that work at these companies. The third column is an interesting feature. This is the number of people that are related to working with data. So this could be data scientists, but it could also be data engineers, ML engineers, anything that are anybody that's related to data. And you'll start to see that as approximately as the number of people that work at these companies increase, the number of people working with data are also increase. You'd kind of expect that, especially given our bias to working at companies that do data science, that have AI at their heart. Then we have another interesting feature in the fourth column, the number of models in production at each of these companies. Again, the smaller the company, the fewer number of models they're likely to have at their company. There is one big outlier there, and that's the one in the middle, where we have approximately 50 people working on data-related problems, but they have thousands of models, and that's an artifact of their business model. So that's a bit of an outlier, and also, well, in fact, I think that doesn't correlate too well to the size of the business at all. And interestingly, that also makes it quite difficult to map to the number of MLOps people that are working at that company as well. Because if we look at the final column, this is the number of people that were on an MLOps team, if an MLOps team existed at all. I've tended to include support staff in that number. So this is not just engineers. This is also potentially product owners, product managers, people like that, to help support the structure side of things. At the very bottom, we've worked with a company that only had a part-time sort of MLOps capability. That wasn't even really their job. They were just doing it because nobody else would do it. But most of the companies we work with, they tend to only hire us because they know they need an MLOps platform team, and therefore most of the companies we've worked with have had a team and have a minimum of one person working on this full time. But you'll see that those numbers are actually relatively small, even for the massive enterprise at the top there. We've got hundreds to thousands of people working on these systems, and there's only approximately 30 people dedicated to building out the platform. It's a relatively small number of people that are providing solutions for their engineers, and that's actually a good sign. That's actually a good thing. It's proving that the automations and the tools that they're putting in place allows that company to scale. So that's really what everybody should be aiming for. But yeah, in general, the number of people that are involved with data, we could say the number of data scientists to make it simpler. The number of data scientists roughly correlates with the size of the MLOps team, and the number of models. There's some very sort of weak correlation there as well, and those really are the two main drivers for the size of an MLOps team. If you have more users doing more different things, then you probably need more people to be able to support them. Which brings me to the crux of the problem and just some conclusions and general recommendations, really based upon what we've seen. If you have more than 10 to 20 data scientists, then you should be looking at developing an MLOps platform team. It's highly likely that there are there are pain points and there are potential optimizations that you can make to automate away a lot of the repetition that those 10 to 20 data scientists are doing. So if you have 10 to 20 data scientists or data related people in your company and you don't have an MLOps platform team, now's the time to initiate that process. And roughly, based upon our numbers, you need approximately one MLOps engineer to support 10 data scientists. A similar metric you could use is the number of models that you're running in production. And if you're at the point where you have 10 to 50 models or AI applications running in production, then again, you should be looking at hiring your first MLOps platform engineer. The more models you have, the more likely that one of them is going to fail. So it's a case of when, not if. And again, we've got a rough order of magnitude, one MLOps engineer to support 10 models potentially. But that we did have a lot of outliers in that data. With that one company that had one person supporting thousands of models. That outlier, incidentally, was only possible because all of those models were very, very, very similar. I'm sure it's if we were to equate it not just by the number of models in production, but the number of different applications that are being used the number of different models used for different applications, then it would be a much smaller number. If you have models running in hardware, then the numbers tend to be a little bit different because you do need more tooling and more support in order to package those models effectively to fit inside the hardware. So I would recommend that those numbers are a bit lower if you're working with hardware. So roughly, one engineer per 5 hardware models. And finally, if you work in an industry that values risk, then again, that number should probably come down. So what do I mean by that? I mean that many companies are working in like a regulated environment, for example, and in those environments, you need to be more confident and more certain that your models are going to work, and you need to put more investment up front to keep track of all of those models. So then it becomes more important to have an MLOps platform team to handle all of that risk management side of things, and therefore 1 per 5 data scientists or 1 per 5 models. I say it's arguable because I think all companies should value risk. All companies should be trying to put governance in place to be able to manage the risk of their models. But it's maybe less important in certain industries compared to others. And also, when I'm talking about these numbers, these are all just rough, guesstimates. But don't forget that as the team grows, as the size of the MLOps platform team grows, you will need support staff to help manage that team. You need a product owner. You potentially need a team leader. You potentially need a project manager, and more. Depending on what structure you're trying to build within the business. All right, so let me try and summarize that. It's taken a bit longer than I expected. So we're at 33 minutes already. Thanks for staying with me so far. So MLOps in general is a risk management process. We're trying to build tools and processes to help manage that risk, and also help build tools that help automate the boring parts to speed up delivery. MLOps depends on an established technical capability. We saw that hierarchy of needs. You need to have sort of basic software engineering practices in place before you can start building your MLOps team on top, because we need the tools to be able to do our job. Based upon those numbers, most businesses need a dedicated MLOps team. It's only the smallest startups that potentially don't need a dedicated team, or maybe those that don't have models in production yet, or maybe they're only sort of beta testing with a small number of users, something like that. Once you start getting to the point where you have tens of data scientists or tens of models, you need to start thinking about a dedicated team to help support those people. The challenges, however, with MLOps is that there's no one size fits all solution. No one product will work for your business, and also you can't just copy paste solutions that have been developed at other companies into yours. You need to decide and build one to fit you. Another challenge that we see is that the cadence of an MLOps platform team is a little bit different to the rest of the company. So you are still developing processes and products to help other people, and so you do have deliverables, you do have goals, you do have users, but because they're internal users, there's a different cadence to like the product or the service, the thing that the end user, the end customer of that business is actually using. Some companies try and force those cadences together. I find that a bit counterproductive, because it places an unnecessary burden on the MLOps team, basically. And similarly, companies also try to enforce the same ways of working on the MLOps team as they do the rest of the organization. So if the rest of the software engineering organization is using Scrum, then that means the MLOps platform team has to use Scrum as well. And especially when the MLOps platform teams tend to be quite small, usually quite close-knit, and they don't have too many dependencies on other parts of the business or other parts of the software. It's just an unnecessary burden. It just makes it much harder to work. So yeah, beware Scrum. And finally, it's very hard to find the right people. The range of skills that I've kind of discussed throughout this presentation, the machine learning, the product ownership, the product management, the product development and UX side of things, marketing, sales, and sort of consulting and helping people and selling to potential internal teams, they're all unrelated to the actual technical task of MLOps. So finding a person that has all of those skills is incredibly hard. Value that person if you have one. All right. So that's it. If you've got any more questions, then please reach out to me at phil@Winder.AI. I'd love to help you on your MLOps project if you have any challenges at the moment. This is part of a range of talks that I like to do once a month. We've got one more next month that's really exciting. So check that out at Winder.AI/events. I did have a few more questions that I wanted to talk about, but I didn't really have time to fit it into this presentation. We mentioned briefly about the structure of an MLOps team, but also people have questions about like how should they operate, how should they run. That's a really interesting question. And also, what are they responsible for? What should they be delegating to other teams? Another really interesting question. Maybe I can tackle in another presentation if anybody is interested in that. So I'd like to thank you for your time. Reach out to me if you've got any questions. All right, I'll leave it there. Thanks a lot. Appreciate you being here, and I will see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.